Hey guys, thanks for coming back. Good morning. Well, it might be morning for some people, maybe it's the afternoon, maybe it's the night, who knows. But it's early morning for us, because that's the way we like to roll. Today is a cool day because we get to put a suspension in. Now this is the old suspension. And a lot of guys online on YouTube have questions about installing aftermarket suspensions in different sleds. It seems to be a bit of an anomaly for guys. But it's not that hard. You've seen my other videos. I've put all kinds of different mismatched suspensions in. It just takes a little bit of tricking around and we get her done. So this is a stock suspension, 121 pounds. We're getting rid of that. And we're going to put this EZ Ryde suspension in it. Well, there are many differences actually in these suspensions. It's meant for trail riding, all right? It's meant to react better on the trail, cornering, accelerating, slowing down, all that kind of stuff. And that's really no good for us because when we have this type of suspension, it sort of counteracts what we wanted to do in the powder. I found this EZ Ryde suspension on kijiji.ca. It was in Edmonton or out west somewhere. Used, had about 900 miles on it, which is pretty darn good. And it's actually a 153. So this was meant for a 153 cat of some sort. Now, that kind of poses a little bit of a problem because I'm putting a 159 in. But I've made a couple of mods, of course, because that's how we do things here. I put bigger wheels on the back. So that's going to take up a bit of that track space. And I'm going to move the suspension back a wee bit. So I'm hoping that's going to take up that extra little bit of track space. Now, when you're talking about track length and suspension length and all that, okay, now this is a 159-inch track going into this sled. Now, this is a 153 skid. Now, the difference in that is 6 inches, but that's 6 inches overall. So sort of cut that in half. You're dealing with 3 inches of lengthening to the original stock skid, if that's what we wanted to do, right? So if this was a 153, if we wanted to fit it into a 159, we'd add a 3-inch extension. But like I said, I put these bigger wheels on. I'm going to move it back in the skid a little bit. Now this is a pretty cool suspension. I've never ridden one of these before, but these have been reviewed and guys love them. Apparently the skis are kept down really well. That's what you want. I know wheelies look fun on sleds and we all like to do that kind of thing. In the deep powder, you want to keep the skis down. You want to keep the sled floating across the powder on top of it. Now, I had a bunch of questions about this suspension. So what I do, I just called EZ Ryde, and they were very nice to me. They helped me out. They told me exactly what I need to know as far as the mounting distances between these 2 points. I got all that information, and it's very important that you have that info. If we were going to put a rev suspension in that sled, we just can't arbitrarily pick a position and just mount these in and hope for the best. You will mess up the configuration of the skid and it's not going to work properly. You're probably going to break something. You need to go find a rev, the one that you took it out of, measure the distance between the mounting holes. When you've done that, then you can mount your skid. Okay, very important. So now we know from EZ Ryde that the distance between here and here, the center of these holes, is 26¼ inches or 26.226, which is pretty much 26¼ It's good enough for me. So we're going to mount this up. We're going to play around with it a little bit. And we're going to see how this thing really works on the trail. But of course, that's going to happen a little later on. Now, I've got to mention one other thing here while I'm doing this, because this is a pretty cool little gizmo. This is a bracket that we're going to install for the front suspension. It's from carbonsled.com, or otherwise known as Nextech. These guys come up with some pretty cool ideas, let me tell you. And this just makes it so we can adjust the front of our suspension up and down. Now, the reason we might want to do that is because we might want to change our riding style. Maybe we're going on trail one day, maybe we're going to be off in the powder the next, change the angle of attack of the front of the suspension. Tuning your suspension is kind of like tuning a clutch or your motor. Sometimes for different environments, it just needs to be done. So this is going to be fun to have. We're going to put this in now and it's going to be incorporated into this whole install. So check out carbonsleds.com for all their cool stuff. Okay, now we're going to measure things up to fit in here. Yes, there is a little bit of math involved sometimes. You know, we don't like to get into the math when we're doing mods because it just sort of detracts from the fun. But anyway, the specs that EZ Ryde sent us, they told us that from the middle of the axle shaft back had to be about 12.75 inches, 12¾ Well, I moved it back an extra inch. They told me potentially that I could run into an issue of the track coming loose. But let's see what happens. If I have to, I'll buy the proper length rails. But you know what? I haven't been wrong yet, so let's give it a try. So I've measured back 13.75 inches. That brings me right to here. All I did was I've marked my bracket where my bracket location is with my marker. And I've marked the inside of this little hole because, you know, this is where the bolt adjustment is. And I plugged a hole in there earlier just to do a loose fit of the suspension, and it's a little bit off, but that's not really going to affect anything. But it is very important that on both sides of this sled, these mounting brackets are the same distance back and the same distance up or down on both sides. That cross shaft through the suspension has to be mounted up perfectly, front and back, or else the geometry of the suspension will be off. You're going to cause unequal wear, premature wear, possibly damage to your suspension. So that's marked. I'm going to cut that out. I'm going to get this cool bracket in. Try that again. So I've got my groove cut. Just going to mount this up and drill myself a little bit of a pilot hole here. I've also made a plate that goes on the back. It's got a bunch of holes on it, just the old piece of metal I had laying around. And this is going to go in the back here. That one's all done. Let's go do the other side. There we go. All right, we've got our two front suspension mounts in. Now we need to mark off 26¼ inches. That's what EZ Ryde told us to do. So we're going to do that right there. We're going to have to mount this bracket. I loosely put it in there, but that's where our bracket needs to go. Now these brackets, they came with the kit that the guy sent me from out west. So they came in really handy. I'm going to use the same brackets, but I am going to clamp them in. These rear mounts I'm going to actually bolt in. I'm not going to use the rivets on them. Just in case I want to move them, I can just bolt these in, cut any excess off with the cut-off saw, and that'll be good and strong. Now, you know, this is one of the things you got to do your homework on, because you'll have installed that nice suspension in your sled. You got your 1972 Elan. You've got a nice new Rev suspension, some takeoff that some guy sold you cheap. You got to make sure you get the mounting instructions bang on and the specs, the distances, or else it's just going to keep riding like that 72 Elan. It's going to be nutty when we're done with that suspension. It's going to be great. This rear bracket in. Now I'm just going to trim off these bolts. Don't want that excess bolt catching up on the snow. All right, let's just do up the other side. Then we can mount this puppy. There we go. I'll save you the time of having to watch that whole thing go on, but we got that one on now. Now we can slip the skid in, get that mounted up. Put the front in first. Slide it over. Loosen off the wheels as much as you can. Before you put any of these shafts in, make sure you lube them up. Again, I'm using this synthetic low temp grease. Just want to make sure that stuff, number one, rolls in there really nicely, but you also want to make sure that it doesn't seize up. Boom. Anti-seize in there as well. Now this works easiest if you have one of your friends helping you out. But my friend is holding the camera right now. You got to use these little spacers. There we go. I'm going to slip that up into our new cool little mounts here. I just used some grade 8 hardware. Got to make sure you use a hardened bolt to go into these things because they do take a lot of abuse. All right, so we ended up mounting the camera up on the tripod. I got my cameraman on the other side. It just makes things a little easier. We're just going to pull this back, use our little adjusting screw here, pop this up inside. I think I'm in there. Now there's this little washer that comes with this bracket kit from carbonsleds.com. You just got to make sure it fits into the groove and it'll hold it in place. It's kind of notched so you can, if we want later on, we can pop it out and raise this whole thing up if we want. I've got it in the bottom one, that's where we're going to start. We can't adjust that until we've actually tried it on the trail. After you've ridden it a few times, make sure you check that and make sure it's tight. There we go. There we go with the help of my trusty cameraman, which I usually don't have. Got that in. So all we need to do is tighten up the other side, set our track tension with our wheels. All the weight off that track. It's pretty loose right now, so we're gonna tighten that up a wee bit. Now that's going to be good for now. Apparently you have to run this track a little tighter with this kind of suspension. So we're going to see if that works. We'll align it a little later on out in the yard when we can run this thing up. I'll just tighten these up here, change my battery. Now, we're not done, but we're so close. We're going to have to still mount our reservoir for our shock. And I'm just going to put these on now so I don't forget it. EZ Ryde sends these covers for your shocks. You got to keep them on. If not, this area in here will fill with snow and ice and you'll end up damaging your shock. You got to make sure you keep this covered. Keep the bad stuff off. Does that keep that good? It does, eh? I think that's going to be pretty darn good right there. It's a little tricky because our tunnel is kind of, modded. Mounted that up. Now I just need to make another bracket that comes down here and I'll mount that up. Then I just put this on. This will be the easiest if I just mount this up where I want it. Then I'll drill the holes for this mount. Reservoir is in there, it's nice and tight. Front mounts are in, back mounts are in, track's tightened up. Probably a little too tight right now, but you know what? Let's drop her to the ground, see how it looks. Right now it's looking pretty sick. Now this suspension came off an Arctic, big heavy sled. We know how heavy they are. Anyway, it's jacked up pretty hardcore, so I'm gonna have to release some of that spring tension on there, some spring pressure. I'll do that out in the field a little later on. I'll soften up the ride a little bit. Right now I got a little bit of movement on it. But you know what? That looks pretty nice. We've got a good angle, good approach angle. Check this out over here. Now one of the good things about this is the approach angle of this track coming onto the snow. It's a real gentle angle, and that's what you want in a powder sled. You want that nice angle like that. Trail sleds will have more of a steeper slope like that because they really don't care about coming up on top of the powder. But that right there, boy, that's looking good. I like it. Now guys, don't let this intimidate you. That's an easy install. Easy tools to use. You don't need a whole lot of technical knowledge to do anything like this. So buy something like that if you want to mod your sled out, extend it, lighten it up, probably saved about 20 pounds putting that suspension on, and it's even longer. So I'm pretty happy with that. Make sure that if you like my videos, you hit that subscribe button, give me a big old thumbs up. Thanks for watching.